the issues affecting Asia's animals, and the stories of the people working on their behalf. We'll be taking you on a tour of what's been happening lately in the animal protection space around Asia and also bringing you updates from our huge network of animal protection organizations and our many working groups. Welcome to the Asia for Animals podcast.
Are some elephants more likely than others to venture into human areas to look for resources? What factors affect this? Could it be down to individual elephants' personalities or habits? My name is Elliot, and in this episode of Asia for Animals podcast, we are joined by Ave Owen, Program Manager at Bring the Elephant Home and a PhD candidate studying elephant communities in Kuri Bui National Park in Thailand. By identifying individual elephants and looking at their individual behaviour patterns, Ave hopes to identify if some elephants contribute more to human-elephant negative interactions and how this knowledge can be used to create a brighter future for elephants and people. Welcome to the podcast, Ave.
Thanks for having me.
Would you like to do a bit of an introduction of yourself? Tell us about your history, how you ended up in Thailand, how you ended up starting to work for elephants.
Yeah, definitely. So, my name's Ave Owen. I'm originally from Canada, but I've been living in Thailand for over 10 years now. And my career with elephants really began more working with captive elephants and working with captive elephant venue owners who were sort of working with, at the time, and it still very much is, like a changing trend in the tourism industry where different international communities of travelers were looking for different opportunities to see elephants in different situations. And so that really sparked my interest and sort of the relationship that Thailand has with elephants spiritually, culturally, economically, ecologically, all became very fascinating to me. And I was very lucky to sort of be taken in by a group of mahouts who people who care for captive elephants, and just spending time with that mahout community and really learning about elephant behavior and their deep, complex cognitive abilities and complex social interactions, memory, problem-solving skills, and so many other things. I really just became enthralled with elephants and wanted to learn more about them. And so spent time working with different captive elephant venues and different NGOs and organizations that were working to improve welfare standards for captive elephants in the tourism industry. And as we sort of discussed what captive elephants needed in these tourism centers, we sort of came to speak about, how do wild elephants live and how would these elephants be living if they were in the wild? And so that was a really interesting point of discussion, and it prompted me to want to learn about elephants in the wild and sort of how they lived, socialized, migrated, foraged. And so, I started spending time with the team at Bring the Elephant Home, an organization that's now been running in Thailand for over 20 years. And the founder of Bring the Elephant Home, Dr. Antoinette Vandewater, had then moved to South Africa to start her PhD. And so she was looking for somebody to sort of come in and work as country director for the Thailand operation. And so that was nearly 7 years ago now. And as soon as I started working with Bring the Elephant Home and learning more about wild elephants' relationships with people and the communities that live adjacent and within their habitats, I really just started to become more fascinated with the topic of human-elephant coexistence and how local people and their economics and social structure were intertwined with the relations with wild elephants in Thailand. And I went on to do a master's degree at Miami University, and then have just started my PhD in the conservation ecology program at King Mongkut's University of Technology in Bangkok last year. So it seems like a bit of a whirlwind, but that's how I got here. Yeah.
And it seems like you have a lot of a lineup in your personal history and how you started working with elephants, similar to how Bring the Elephant started also. Could you tell us a bit about the organization you work with and their work across Asia and Africa?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Bring the Elephant Home is really passionate about a community-based approach to human-elephant coexistence, both at our project sites in Thailand, working with Asian elephants, and then in South Africa, with African elephants. And the organization is a really fascinating one because it's a small team of very passionate, dedicated people. And like I said, we've been founded for about over 20 years now. in Thailand. And what we really believe is that human elephant coexistence can be achieved through sort of a one well being approach, which is a framework that was created and recently published by our founder, Dr. Antoinette Vandwater. And this is really important to consider because we approach human elephant coexistence and elephant conservation broadly through the lens of trying to not only mitigate or decrease the negative consequences that people experience as a result of their proximity to elephants, but also by increasing the benefits and opportunities that local people have because of elephants. So we don't just want to decrease economic losses as a result of crop damage, for example, but we also want to create opportunities for local people to have alternative livelihoods through ecotourism, skills development and capacity building opportunities, and yeah, many other things that improve social cohesion and yeah, build resilience in communities coexisting with elephants. And as a result of this investment into increasing the well-being of communities that live in and around elephant habitat, we not only help to conserve elephants, but we also help to restore the well-being of communities and really of the shared ecosystem where people and elephants exist.
A lot of the news we hear about human and elephants together is these negative interactions. So I really like the term where you're using elephants and human coexistence. Could you introduce us a little bit more to that concept, but also what do the challenges look like, especially across Asia and maybe particularly in the area where you're working?
Yeah, the reframing of human elephant conflict to human elephant coexistence is something that our team at Bring the Elephant Home is really passionate about. We believe that the term human elephant conflict really implies that elephants are active participants in a battle with people. And just the term human elephant conflict really perpetuates the idea that humans and elephants and really humans and non human nature are really at war with one another. And we need to sort of step back and think about that a little bit because really this isn't human elephant conflict. Neither side is seeking this conflict out or really willingly perpetuating it. There's no winner or loser in human elephant conflict. And that's why we really try to rephrase it and discuss coexistence because we can talk about conflict all we want, but really human elephant conflict is the competition for space and resources in which humans and elephants, because of habitat fragmentation, habitat loss, land use change as a result of agricultural expansion and urbanization, really this all just comes from an increasingly difficult situation where elephants who have great ecological needs are just have less and less space. And it's the same for people, like in changing economies, especially in agrarian societies that are typically adjacent to elephant habitat. People need this agricultural land to cultivate crops, to sell and feed their families. And so by framing it as human elephant conflict, it really poses that one of those two sides is in the wrong. And so Bring the Elephant Home really focusing on mutual benefits for elephants, humans, and the ecosystems in which they inhabit. We really believe that discussing coexistence, and not just coexistence, but coexistence could sort of mean that the two just live alongside each other. But we really phrase this even in our mission statement as meaningful coexistence, and that the two are actively coexisting with each other and benefiting from one another, and that humans can have a role in elephant conservation, and not just can, but they should, and they always have. Right? There is no extracting humans and elephants from one another in the landscapes in which we work. You know, here in Thailand, we have open conservation systems like open national parks where the protected areas are not fenced off. And this really gives us an opportunity to apply a convivial conservation approach or an approach where a conservation philosophy in which humans are able to exist within what would be wild or protected spaces and through their active participation in those spaces, thereby make it better for elephants. You know, we can talk about removing invasive species or clearing out weeds that would strangle out seedlings that would then grow into bigger trees and provide shade and food for elephants. And conversely, when elephants are in human spaces, if we look beyond the economic losses that come as a result of crop damage and property damage, elephants are seed dispersers. You know, they clear pathways through thick forests. Even just in the area around my house, there was just like a small puddle, and elephants came to that puddle over and over again and used it to spray themselves with mud and to drink from the water that collected there, and ended up being quite a large water catchment that then local farmers were using to water the crops that they planted around it. And this is just sort of emblematic of the relationship that elephants and people can have. And so when we talk about coexistence and human elephant coexistence, these are the examples we're hoping to highlight, and the future we're sort of hoping to carve out with the two species together.
Our listeners will be able to hear the passion and admiration you have in your voice for your work and these animals that you work with. What are the perceptions currently from the people who live in the areas that are encountering challenges with elephants, on a near daily basis?
Yeah, that's a great question. So most of the statistics and kind of information I'll be sharing is really mostly in the context of the communities surrounding Kuri Bui National Park, which is a national park that's home to about 300 wild elephants. Thailand's total population currently is estimated to be about 4,000 to 4,400 wild elephants, and the population in this area is roughly 300. So quite a significant and important stronghold for Asian elephants in the country. And Bring the Elephant Home has been based on the border of Koi Bui National Park in Ruam Thai Village, which is really the human elephant conflict hotspot in the area. And I moved here about 5 years ago to begin my master's research with Miami University. And that master's research was a multidisciplinary study where we profiled the opportunity to plant alternative crops or crops that elephants don't eat as a means of promoting human elephant coexistence. And I might talk a little bit more about that in just a second, but to come back to your question, that multidisciplinary study involved a household survey with roughly 10% of the total population living in Ruam Thai Village. And we found that 77% of household survey participants stated that they cannot coexist with wild elephants. Further, we found that 91% of people currently experience negative consequences as a result of their proximity to elephants, and only 46% of people report experiencing benefits as a result of their proximity to elephants. So, yeah, those are sort of maybe sterile statistics at face value, but they really do provide insight into the relationship that people and elephants have and how much room we really have to grow as an NGO in supporting this community to decrease consequences and access benefits from elephants.
Those are really some incredible statistics straight from the people who are, around these challenges every day. What do you think it's going to take to change these perceptions of people and to make sure, not just change perceptions, but make sure people are benefiting from elephants and able to coexist?
Yeah, so I think that in order to ensure that people are able to coexist with elephants and to really provide opportunities for them to access benefits, we need to circle back to this community-based conservation approach. And I think that this is really important to discuss for a moment because when we discuss international NGOs working in the global south, but really working on wildlife conservation projects, it's important that we remember that oftentimes when conservation work is happening, these projects are conducted with this top-down approach, where local people or the people who are at the greatest proximity to the problem are the ones who have the least decision-making power in how that problem is solved. And this is an issue for several reasons, but one of them, aside from just poor governance fit, is that solutions are often designed externally. And when solutions are designed externally, they're not tailored for the local context, or they're not accessible by local people, or there's some kind of incongruency between the steps to adopting the solution and the end users or the people who would implement the solution in their own landscape. And so when we talk about human elephant coexistence and how we can increase the opportunities for local people to gain benefits from their proximity to elephants, we really think about community-based conservation as a framework for achieving that. And so it's not just about should we build a fence or should we have rangers or should we use firecrackers or electric fences. It's more, I often believe that mitigating human elephant conflict or achieving human elephant coexistence is more about how we go about it than what we do like than what is done in the first place. And so I think that when local people are meaningfully engaged in coexistence and we engage in skills development and capacity building that allows local people to be the leaders of solving this problem that exists in their own backyard, we really achieve greater sustainability in solving this problem because local people are able to collect their own data, whether that's formal data that's written down and sort of analyzed and shared with other people, or whether that's just their own experiences that are recorded systematically and allows them to make decisions based on that of what works and what doesn't. And so I think that how we can do this is not just one solution. Like I wish I could tell you like, oh, we just change from planting crops that elephants like to eat to ones they don't like to eat, or there's a certain type of fence or a certain type of system that could just solve the whole problem. But globally, when we read the literature on human elephant conflict and coexistence, one of the main solutions or the main kind of results that people come to is that there isn't just one solution. And we sort of have to have this toolkit of multiple solutions that are implemented and sometimes changing. Elephants are such adaptable, resilient species that when they encounter a deterrent or something that's meant to stop them from entering farms, they're really quickly able to outsmart it or overpower it. You know, so it's a difficult problem to solve. Um, but when that problem is being solved by local people, the people who are most affected by human-elephant conflict, we restore agency and autonomy into the hands of people who really need to solve this problem the most. Um, and so some solutions that we're trying here on the border of Kuri Bui National Park and Ruam Thai Village, one of them is a community-based alternative crop planting initiative where local folks are trying to transition the crop that they're planting. So currently 70% of people in the area cultivate pineapple as their main source of income, and mango, jackfruit, and rubber are also cultivated quite broadly on the landscape. So these are all palatable crops, or crops that elephants like to eat. They're highly attractive and they draw elephants out of the protected area into these human-dominated landscapes where, elephants are met with night guards or farmers trying to guard their crops from elephants at nighttime. And as a result, it creates this really tense situation between people and elephants because farmers are having to guard their crops from elephants actively throughout the night because elephants are usually coming into their farms overnight when the landscape is very quiet and they're less likely to be observed by people. They like to be very elusive and sort of cryptic in the landscape, especially when they're outside of the protected area. And so, in order to sort of disincentivize the presence of elephants in agricultural landscapes, farmers are now working to transition their crops from these palatable species to ones that elephants don't like to eat. So, as a result, one of the results from my master's research conducted at Miami University was following a trial of 10 experimental species where we planted pineapple, which we know that elephants like to eat, adjacent to lemongrass, citronella, chili, lime, kaffir lime, mulberry, ginger, galangal, and turmeric, and aloe vera. We studied how elephants interacted with those experimental species in comparison to pineapple. And we didn't just study this in terms of which crop species sustained the most damage. We also wanted to understand which species were drought resistant. We live in a very drought prone area here, and with climate change and global warming, these farming areas are receiving less and less rain every year. So we wanted to find a crop species that was resilient to the presence of elephants, resilient to drought, and also had a viable sort of economic value in the local market. And we found that lemongrass and citronella is the crop that's typically used to make essential oils that are used in mosquito repellent candles or natural mosquito sprays. And lemongrass is used in aromatherapy, and it's also used in the many South Asian and Southeast Asian culinary industries. And so they found that these two species were resilient to elephant-caused crop damage. And as a result, now farmers who are able to, who want to transition either some or all of their land to these crops can start doing this. They don't have to wait for an NGO to find the funding. They don't have to wait for a government to come and inspect and implement it. They don't have to wait for some external agency to decide that this is appropriate. if and when a farmer believes that they want to adopt such a project and join other farmers who are doing so, they're able to implement that solution and join a community enterprise, which is established shortly after the research ended. So now there's a group of about 15 farmers who are working together to time their crop cultivation, harvest at the same time, and sell to a diverse range of local markets. And now that that small group is sort of building momentum in this, and kind of doing this community organizing work at a very grassroots level, it really opens the door for more farmers to join the project and for them to gain momentum as a community-based conservation movement.
Yeah, I really like that point about where you say that it's putting the agency back in people's hands to make decisions for themselves, and it's almost like open source information that these people can also try. Like you said, you're not waiting for an international NGO to come in, which is incredibly important, that people can take control of their own lives and try alternative crops or other things for themselves. It sort of really goes back into what you mentioned before, which was Dr. Antoinette van der Water and her PhD. Firstly, congratulations on her PhD. Antoinette's one of those amazing conservationists I've ever met, very passionate and dedicated. But this PhD where you talk about, the one well-being approach, it looked at aligning elephant conservation with societal aspirations. And she made this new framework, which is exactly sort of what Bring the Elephant Home seems to be really about now. Looking at the environment, looking at people, and looking at the animals as well in this situation, rather than a human-centric or an animal-centric approach, which is quite common in various conservation initiatives. Could you explain a bit more about this framework and how it readjusts our thinking about conservation and the individuals?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm glad that you raised this framework, and I'm glad that you sort of touch on Antoinette's work, because it's really central not just to human elephant conflict and coexistence in this local level, really where many organizations and researchers are trying to find what solution works here in this small corner of the world. But I think our entire team and the broader conservation community is really inspired by Antoinette's research, because it it really looks at conservation in a broader lens and sort of takes human elephant coexistence as a case study for the broader coexistence and broader possibilities for human and non-human nature to benefit from each other's existence in a global scale. And so, the one well-being approach, I'll have to do another podcast episode with Antoinette, because hearing her describe it is far more charismatic and moving than me. But it really looks at aligning benefits and the needs of humans, wildlife, and ecosystems. And so I think that when we look at this case study, trying to find solutions that sort of fit this model, and that many solutions that we try to achieve human and elephant coexistence often are beneficial to people but have detrimental consequences to elephants, or are maybe beneficial for elephants, but they don't consider other wildlife on the landscape. And so I think that this is just a really important framework to consider, because it sort of helps us to really reimagine how we think about conservation solutions and consider all stakeholders, like human and non-human stakeholders, when we try to implement a conservation solution.
And so now, firstly, I love how you say human and non-human stakeholders. This is something that's come across in Asia for Animals work quite a lot. Is especially when we look at challenge other species such as macaques, which have similar challenges with and for people. So looking at non-human stakeholders is also really important in this. And I think this is where a lot of our listeners will be really interested in this podcast. Is now moving on to your research. It does take this one well-being approach also, and you're sort of focusing on the animals and the elephants, their individuals or personalities or their habits, let's say, in your research. Could you explain a bit about what you're going to be doing over the next couple of years?
Yes, definitely. So my PhD research began in August of 2024, and the PhD research will be based fully in Kuri Bui National Park, and I'll be using individual elephant identification and behavioral ecology to sort of understand the sort of social dynamics of the elephant population in Kuri Bui National Park, both inside the protected area and outside of it. So my PhD research was really inspired by researchers who came long before me, who really began and pioneered long-term elephant monitoring projects. Dr. Cynthia Moss is one of them, who's been studying the elephants in Amboseli National Park since 1976. We really, when we think about elephants and their cognitive capacity and their complex social structures, these these findings that we have that really alert us to the complexity and to the importance of elephants really come from the long-term monitoring of individuals. And so while we know that that's incredibly important ecologically, not just to understand which individual is which, but also to be able to accelerate veterinary interventions if they were needed, to be able to deploy and monitor different conservation interventions, like GPS collars or different interventions. It's really important that we're able to really know which individuals we are targeting and able to come back to those individuals. So, anti-poaching, some male elephants in Asia with large tusks are particularly susceptible to poaching. And so being able to track and monitor these individuals is incredibly important. And while working in Asian elephant landscapes, dissimilarly from African elephants, who typically live in these open savanna areas where it's very easy to drive a research vehicle in and use binoculars or long range scope to see the elephants and the unique markings on their ears or tusks or tails to identify them. Asian elephants live in these densely forested habitats and are typically much more elusive to the presence of people as well. And so it makes it very challenging to conduct this research, and that's probably why there aren't really any published or working examples of protected areas that are using this long-term sort of longitudinal behavioral monitoring of individual elephants in the park. But that's really what we're hoping to implement here in Kuri Bui National Park over the next few years. So my PhD research conducted in the Conservation Ecology program at King Mongkut's University of Technology, Chonburi, will begin in probably June of this year and then carry on for 2 years, where I'll be entering the national park 12 to 16 days per month. And every day when I enter the national park, I'll drive my research vehicle into various viewpoints. And upon detecting a herd of elephants, we'll capture photo and video data of the whole herd and of each individual we detect, and we'll later use that photo and video data to find unique markings on the elephant's ears, like different, the shape of their ear, whether there's depigmentation, or so this like pink spotty depigmentation present, whether there are any like notches or tears in their ears that elephants can sometimes get when they're moving through thorny or sharp foliage. Or whether there are any holes in their ears. And as a result, we're able to kind of find those unique markings and then put them into our database, and we can sort of create a unique 21-digit elephant ID code from the presence or absence of those features. So we don't only look at their ears, we also look at their tusks. This is another one that makes identifying and cataloging Asian elephants a little bit different and, to be honest, more difficult than African elephants. So elephant tusks usually, they all might look the same at first glance. They're actually very different. And so some individuals will have kind of horizontal, sort of outward pointing tusks. Some have some tusks that point straight down. Some have more thicker and longer tusks. Some are more shorter, and some of them break when elephants are fighting or stripping bark off of trees. And so the formation and the features of their tusks are really useful to identify and distinguish one from the other. So that's very common in African elephant studies, but here in Asia, only male elephants have tusks and female elephants don't. And not only that, but not all male elephants do. So only about 30% of the male Asian elephants who are in our database here in Kuri Bui National Park have tusks, and the other ones that don't. Sometimes they can have small, we call tushes, or just very short frontal incisors, but those are not as helpful for identifying one from the other. And so anyway, we'll arrive to the site and collect photos and videos of the elephant's ears, tusks, and tail. On the tail, we're looking for the presence or absence of tail hair or how the length of their tail. And if we sort of code each of these different features, whether they're present or absent, to create this 21-digit code, and that kind of gives an elephant a unique, let's call it barcode or something. And once the elephant is cataloged, we search it in our database to see if that elephant has already been detected. And whether it's an elephant that's already been detected, it will count as a resighting. And then if it's a new detection, we code it as a new individual. What's going to be really fascinating about this study is, again, keeping in line with our community-based conservation approach. We feel really passionately that international researchers should not be the one naming these individuals, and that the task and the right to name individuals is going to be held by the local community. So in Kuri Bui National Park, it's a very unique and special landscape for elephants, and not only for elephants, but also for ecotourism, because shortly after the park was gazetted as a national park in 1999, even though there were now protections in place to protect the elephants inside the park, human-elephant conflict shortly after escalated quite significantly. And so the people who were on the border of the park, living on the outside of it, were experiencing, again, crop damage and various economic losses as a result of crop and property loss. And so the national park and local community worked together to create the Kuri Bui Wildlife Ecotourism Club, which is a collection of about 30 safari guides and about 50 safari drivers, all from the local community here in Rome Thai Village. And those local people can earn alternative income, supplemental income by working as a safari guide or a safari driver, taking ecotourists into the national park on daily safaris that run between 2 and 6 p.m. So the national park provides a lot of really interesting opportunities to sort of study the relationship, not just with elephants, but also elephants' response to anthropogenic influences, such as the sounds of vehicles or the sounds of people or different things like that, which is also another part of the PhD research. So we will be studying how these individual elephants, just their capture history or how frequently they are detected and redetected in this safari area. And then after we identify the individual or individuals that we're seeing, we'll also note their association patterns. So Asian elephants are really interesting and are a little bit different from African elephants, because African elephants have these very stable and rigid social structures. So typically, an African elephant family will be made up of a grandmother, her daughters, her granddaughters, the aunts, and different female herd members that will all kind of stay together for their entire lives. Males, on the other hand, when they reach sexual maturity at around the age of 15 years old, they leave their natal herd and they kind of start wandering, sometimes alone, sometimes in groups of males called bachelor herds, and sometimes joining female herds for short periods of time to either mate or share resources. And this is really interesting because while there's a very rigid structure, these herds really form and are bonded by blood and stay together their entire lives. A researcher named Dr. Sherman De Silva, who is the founder of Trunks and Leaves, an NGO in Sri Lanka that has been studying the elephants in Udawalawe National Park for many, many years. Dr. Sherman De Silva's work found that Asian elephants were actually a little bit different, and potentially because of a lack of predators on the landscape, and potentially because of a more widely available food and water resources. It's not as dry and arid as in savanna landscapes and in Asian elephant landscapes. There is much more food and water availability all throughout the year. So perhaps because they're not constrained by resources and not constrained by anti-predator behavior, having to stay together in a group to guard themselves from carnivore on the landscape, that Asian elephants actually exhibit this much more fluid and flexible social network where they come together at some times of the year and then they spread apart and come together again. It's called fission fusion behavior. And so the elephants fission apart, sometimes when resources are abundant and they don't have to stay together, so they spread apart and access resources in far off places, and then will fusion or come together again at another time of year, again, depending on resource availability and just their broader social trends. And so Dr. Sherman De Silva's research was really pioneering in the social network analysis of wild elephants. And that has been conducted in Sri Lanka and also in India, but a social network analysis has never been conducted in a Southeast Asian elephant population. And so that's really important for us because we really see an opportunity to use our ability to see and monitor these elephants in Kuri Bui National Park as an opportunity to further compare, in a differing ecological landscape and a differing elephant density, different climates, so many different variables here and in those studies in Sri Lanka and India, how will the social network analysis look in a Southeast Asian population? And so that will comprise another aspect of my PhD research. So that again just really reinforces how much we can learn when we identify these elephants as individuals, because we don't just get to know them, but we really get to know their social network and which individuals are highly influential in the landscape, like which individuals have many associates or are very popular social butterflies, let's call them, and which individuals are more solitary, and whether different seasons and different ecological or anthropogenic influences sort of influence that propensity to be more solitary or more social. So so much is going to be learned, but it all begins with the recognition of elephants as individuals.
It sounds like such a huge undertaking and a fascinating undertaking, and I really like the multifaceted approach that you talk about. Crop foraging is a big challenge in your study area, and so through this understanding of individuals' behavior and habits, such as matriarchs leading the herd or adult bulls, you can target specific individuals for mitigation. How do you think your research could specifically help, people and elephants and the understanding of elephants as individuals with their habits and influencing mitigation or coexistent measures into the future in your area? What do these mitigation factors potentially look like?
That's a great question, and I'm glad that you sort of bring back that research inside of Kuri Bui National Park to really emphasizing how we can use that research of studying the behavior of individual elephants to mitigating negative consequences or negative human-elephant interactions. So that's a real focus for us because sort of as we've been discussing, we're at a point in our relationship with wild elephants that I feel theoretical study it can be important, but what really gets me excited about conservation and conservation science, what really sort of pushed me to want to do a PhD, is the ability to sort of use these outcomes, these sort of evidence-based, data-driven results that we get, and implement them as a way of practically mitigating these negative human elephant interactions. And it's sometimes difficult to discuss and difficult to talk about, but we're at a pivotal moment here, not just in this area on the border of Kuri Bui National Park, but in all 13 Asian elephant range countries. Both elephants and humans are sustaining injury and loss of life, on a daily, monthly, yearly basis. And so I feel that when I was sort of setting up the topics of the PhD, I really wanted to understand the individuals and sort of this broader behavioral ecology of how they spend their time and who they associate with and how that all changes in different seasons, but bringing it all back to understanding which elephants leave the protected area, when and where they leave the protected area, and using that all to sort of coalesce into an understanding of why this is all happening. I think that that's really what really fuels me to want to do this. And so we're currently identifying individuals. So I've been studying the elephants in Kuri Bui National Park now for almost 5 years, and we've built up quite a robust database of thousands of photos that we've taken of the elephants inside the protected area. While at the same time, we've been studying elephants outside the protected area. So some of our team members have been using camera traps, which are motion-sensitive cameras. When an elephant or anything walks past the camera, it triggers and takes a photo or short video of the individual. And from that camera trap data in agricultural landscapes and from the photos we've taken with digital cameras inside the protected area, we've been able to identify over 90 individual elephants. And it's a great first step. And I mean, these are just data that we've sort of been piecing together and poring over elephant ears and tails at my computer. But really, once we start the actual data collection in the park for the PhD research, we're really going to learn a lot more.
Wow.
And so this all sort of comes together by understanding which individuals are inside the park and the age class ratios, the sex ratios, but also understanding which individuals are leaving. So we're deploying a network of 64 motion-censored cameras in farms bordering Kuri Bui National Park. We're going to be deploying those cameras hopefully in June of this year. And the type of cameras that we use are really cool. They're called UAVision cameras. and they are AI assisted. And so the cameras are able right now to distinguish between a human or a non-human or a vehicle or something like that. But we're hoping to work with our partners at Wildlife Protection Solutions to provide more elephant footage and hopefully be able to one day train this AI model to recognize individual elephants. But aside from being AI assisted, these cameras are also SMS integrated, which means that you can put an SMS, like a SIM card, inside of the camera. And when an elephant walks past the motion censored camera, not only will it take that photo or video, but it's going to send me a WhatsApp message.
Wow.
So we'll get a WhatsApp message come in, and that message will also be able to be sent to a ranger dispatch station. And that's really important because when we work with multiple stakeholders in the landscape, community members and local farmers are incredibly important. The rangers and protected area managers of Kuri Bui National Park are also key stakeholders in achieving human-elephant coexistence. And so when we work with those rangers, we're hoping that this SMS system with this network of 64 cameras is going to be able to alert rangers and then thereby a network of farmers to the presence of elephants. And usually when a human or elephant is injured or involved in one of these negative interactions, they come about as a result of just surprise or not knowing that each other are there. Like I mentioned earlier, elephants, they don't need to sleep very much. They only sleep for about 3 to 4 hours a night. And so as a result, they wait until these farming areas are much cooler and much more quiet at nighttime. And that's when elephants typically enter farms. From our camera trap data, we get the most detections between midnight and 3 a.m. So you can imagine that, yeah, farmers would be sleeping or even just in the darkness have very poor visibility of elephants at that time. And so this SMS integrated network of UO vision camera traps is not only going to provide vital data that assists our database development, but it's also going to help to alert farmers to the presence of elephants and keep everybody much safer. And so when we deploy this network of cameras, we're going to be using a framework called photographic capture recapture, where we build something called capture histories. So every night of the 2 year study, we're going to be monitoring all the individuals that come out, which ones were present or absent that night. And we're going to be able to take all of this data and analyze it to understand what are the environmental factors, so things like rainfall, temperature, season, crop type, many different factors, but to see what are the factors that are associated with elephant detection. But what I'm most interested in is the inter-individuality between elephants. So this is really important because, as you sort of mentioned when you were asking the question, is that people normally approach human wildlife conflict mitigation from this broad stroke of like trying to deter the species or trying to address these broad understandings of the species behavior or the species habits. But one of the things I learned when I was really spending a lot of time with captive elephants in the earlier part of my career is that every individual is so different. It's one of the most joyous parts of working with elephants as a species is that we all know their intelligence and their ability to problem solve and their cognitive capacity. But really, it's like one of the I think greatest joys of my career has been really understanding just how that inter-individuality affects their behavior, affects their foraging, affects every aspect of their being. And so here in this landscape, now that I'm working with human elephant conflict mitigation in a wild elephant context, it really just rings true to me that we have to go beyond trying to stop elephants from eating crops and really take a much more nuanced approach. So that's why the PhD research seeks to align the behavior observations that we're conducting inside of the protected area. So this means we're going to be, every time we detect an elephant, we'll use a behavior recording application called Zoom Monitor to conduct a 15-minute behavior sample or observation. And during those 15 minutes, we record how frequently the elephants are eating, walking, socializing, but we also record the frequency of vigilant behaviors, aggressive behaviors, these different sorts of behaviors that really give us insight into who is this elephant, how do they respond to different anthropogenic and environmental stimuli, and really understanding these elephants as individuals. If and when we detect them on our camera trap network outside of the protected area, this is really going to help us to start building a behavioral profile for this individual.
Mm.
And that if and when that SMS message reaches a dispatch station for rangers or an alert to local farmers, they're not just going to try to deter an elephant, they're going to try to deter this elephant. And hopefully, when the people who are responding to the presence of that individual are armed with the knowledge of their behavioral patterns, their responses, that we're going to be able to create more targeted, nuanced deterrent methods that are more effective and more streamlined so that we're not expending or wasting or overusing resources when they're not needed. And we're also not habituating elephants to really aggressive or violent deterrence when something as simple as our voice or a light shining in the distance might be enough to get them out of the farm. So this is really going to shine a light on the individuality of elephants and hopefully create a more harmonious relationship between people and elephants, both inside the protected area, because again, these elephants are not just interacting with humans outside. As I mentioned earlier, there's an ecotourism project with people and vehicles inside of the park. And as one of only two protected areas in Thailand that offers a wildlife watching safari with wild elephants, it's really important that Kuri Bui National Park is a model for ethical and responsible ecotourism. So by analyzing elephant behavior inside the protected area and analyzing their response to these different stimuli outside of the protected area, we're not only going to be able to create these ethical, responsible ecotourism guidelines and not only mitigate the negative consequences or mitigate crop damage from elephants, but we're just going to create a more harmonious and uh, a deeper understanding between the humans and elephants in this landscape.
You talk a lot about the diversity of things that are needed for this challenge. Understanding of people and elephants, this amazing use of technology as well, which I'm blown away by. Ave, what does human-elephant coexistence look like in reality 20 years from now?
That's a great question. The PhD is only 2 years of data collection, so 20 years from now is a really tough one, but it's an important question that we should all be asking. I think that it's a good one to ask because, and I'm glad that you ask it, because we often look at human-elephant conflict mitigation really in the short term. I've lived on the border of Kuri Bui National Park in a house where, yeah, elephants frequently pass on a nightly basis, and I've really been able to see and experience firsthand just how difficult it is and dangerous it is to share your space with elephants. But I've also seen how incredible it can be to rally together as a community to sort of solve a problem in our own backyard. And so I think that human elephant coexistence looks like a future where people can use the presence of elephants and the challenges that they pose to us to increase social cohesion, community resilience, to build skills, to work together, to understand non human nature, to sort of grow as a community to solve a problem. And I think that the act of solving human elephant conflict, the act of stepping into human elephant coexistence, it doesn't just stop with elephants. Like all over the world, people coexist with wild species that, yeah, pose threats and challenges to them all the time. And I think that what human elephant coexistence looks like to me is not necessarily a full decrease elimination, like we never see a crop eaten or damaged by an elephant again. And it doesn't necessarily look like, I quoted earlier that 77% of people feel they cannot coexist with elephants, that we see that number go to zero or something, and 100% of people feel they can coexist with elephants. Like practically, I don't think that is like a reality even in 20 years, and I don't necessarily know if that's the reality we should be shooting for. But I think to come back to what I was saying a little bit earlier is that I think the goal that we should be shooting for is that the act of working towards human elephant coexistence is an act of bettering ourselves and this community, and that all of the benefits this community gets from learning to live with a wild species, Thailand's national animal, the source and the draw for ecotourism and community-based tourism income for this community. The goal, a lot of people just feel these benefits of learning and practicing English as a result of taking in tourists. They feel pride of hosting tourists in their homestay. And none of those things would be happening if there wasn't human elephant coexistence or human elephant conflict, let's say. And so I'm definitely not saying that human elephant conflict is a good thing, but the shared experience of this conservation issue has catalyzed growth and development and so much positivity in this community. And what I hope human elephant coexistence looks like in the future is just that the scales are tipped, and that while I hope consequences are decreased as much as possible, that we can sort of balance and compromise on our lived and our shared ecosystem with wildlife by increasing the benefits as much as possible. And that's not an easy path, but I think that when we transcend research and data and publications and work with community members to equip them with the skills to solve this problem, in their own farm at a micro level, I think the more people that are engaged in that problem solving, that's when we really see landscape level changes becoming possible. And that's when we see knowledge sharing and sort of this, it can go beyond this community on the border of Kuri Bui National Park, and it can extend into communities in other areas of Thailand and Asia and Africa as well. And so I think that human elephant coexistence in 20 years just looks like deeper understanding of elephants, more skills development within communities, increased capacity of local people to be conservation leaders. And if we can achieve that, we might not completely eliminate consequences, but so many benefits will be experienced that the resilience to those consequences will allow people to still experience a good quality of life and I hope a willingness to coexist with wild elephants.
Absolutely. Ave, thank you so much for joining us today, and we wish you all the best in your research, the work of Bring the Elephant Home, and for the community and the elephants of Kuri Bui National Park in Thailand. If anyone listening wants to find out more about the work of Ave and their amazing team, check out Google Bring the Elephant Home and you'll find all the information there. Thank you so much again, Ave.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening. You can find everything you need to know about our work and connect with us at asiaforanimals.com. Tune in for the next episode. Asia for Animals Coalition, a united voice for Asia's animals.